All right, last time we finished with the jawless fish. Once again, a relatively primitive type of fish, either don't have the vertebral column, complete vertebral column, or just arching out around the dorsal nerve cord. So next group, sharks, as well as the stingrays or rays, skates, etc. All of those are known as the cartilage fish. Ichthyosaurs, right here, let's take a look on the name. Ichthyosaurs means fish. Chondros means cartilage. Later on, we'll talk about the tissues. Chondrocyte, the cell which producing cartilage as a tissue. So same kind of idea. Chondrocyte, chondroichthys literally means cartilage fish. Fish which skeleton is made out of cartilage. Okay, it's not a bone yet, or not anymore. Initially, as far as we understand, sharks, or ancestors, I should say, ancestors of sharks had the bony skeleton, and then they decided to simplify it and went with the cartilage for whatever reason, and we're not going into the reasons right now. There is quite a few theories about that. But whenever you'll see any parts of shark, well, except teeth is not made out of cartilage, and we'll talk about it momentarily, but any parts of the shark, the vertebrate, the ribs, the jaw, or anything like that, that is made out of cartilage. In the face-to-face lab, you can actually touch, you have a jaw of shark, jaw of skate, ray. They feel and look very similar to a bone. It's not a bone, it's a cartilage fish. So don't make that particular mistake saying, oh, it's a shark skeleton, it's a shark jaw, so it gotta be made out of bones. No, they make it out of cartilage. All right. So besides the jaws, have a paired appendages and a very specific type of something which is known as the placoid scales. There is a cycloid scales, placoid scales. Sharks, as well as the relatives of theirs, will have a placoid scales. We'll talk about that. They are very interesting. Briefly, we'll talk about it. So again, cartilage skeleton, and it's evolved secondary. Ancestral were having either mineralized cartilage or most likely a bone. But anyway, let me kind of go here. We'll look at the placoid scale. There is an enamel, there is a dentin, there is a pulp cavity, and it's kind of embedded in the dermis. Does it remind you anything? Anything at all? As a matter of fact, this one is a very similar structure as the regular teeth. The teeth which we have. Teeth are covered with enamel. That's why you need to brush them constantly, or on a regular basis, I should say, because the bacteria might kind of get a colony right there and will start destroying the enamel, and then we'll go into a dentin. Anybody heard about well, let me see. I think it's the second part of the PowerPoint. The question is, where is this PowerPoint at the Blackboard? It's the last PowerPoint on that particular unit. It's just in the middle part. We went through about 2/3 of it. Oh, 1/3 of it. We have 2/3 to go. All right. So in this particular case, if you ever thought about root canal, right? Root canal is what exactly is this? That's this part. If you ever done root canal, not a very pleasant experience. I mean, it's not painful, it's just long and people are sticking the fingers in their mouth. But basically what they will do, they will cut the teeth and they will fill up that cavity with the cement. Well, they will kill the nerve. Usually there is a nerve, some of the blood vessels coming in to feed up the dentin and enamel. Well, enamel is no longer alive, so to speak, but to maintain, I should say, not feed per se, but maintain. So whenever the root canal is done, we are cutting through the teeth, going into the pulp cavity and filling it up, destroying, cleaning it up, and then filling it up with any kind of cement. So any kind of bacteria will not get inside and create all kinds of problems. The question is, if this look like a teeth, and the sharks have a teeth, let me kind of pull up. I have a shark tooth somewhere. Here we go. So here we have a shark tooth, right? Right there. Quite strong, quite sharp, still very, very sharp. I can literally cut my finger, at least the skin, not cut off, but and that particular shark tooth is about 60, 70, up to 100 millions of years old. So that one was in the ground for over 100 millions, well, somewhere around between 50 to 100 millions of years, and it's still sharp. So it's extremely successful design. The question is, if I have a teeth and then I have a scales, which looks like a teeth, which has a structure smaller but looks very similar to that, which came first, the teeth or the scales? Excuse me. And here we have two almost opposite theories. One of the theories saying that those scales come first and then they migrate into the mouth and then to grab any kind of prey. Another theory saying no, the teeth started in the mouth and then they covered the body with the smaller teeth-like scales to, you know, increase the speed of those particular creatures, because many of them are very, very efficient predators. All right, so sharks, many species is oviparous, okay? Oviparous, meaning they lay eggs. There is three general terms which you need to know: oviparous, ovoviparous, and viviparous. So oviparous. Oviparous lay eggs. They just lay eggs and that's pretty much done. Many of the skates do that, well, rays, stingrays, etc. Then there is some species which are ovo. Ovo again, ovo means egg. Ovo, but viviparous means that the egg they lay eggs, but it will be incubated in mother's body. So mother body will be used as the incubator to protect those particular eggs and then help with the little ones, etc. And then there is a few species which actually give the birth to the little ones. So there is no eggs per se. The young develops in the mother's uterus, in the womb, essentially, nutrients transferred from the mother's blood. Several species of the sharks which do that. The little ones, the embryos, essentially the shark embryos, they're literally fighting each other in the mother uterus, and there will be, instead of, well, they starting with, let's say, 5, 6, 7, and only 2 or 3 will survive, sometimes 1, the vicious one, right? Yeah. So make sure that you understand the terminology. Ovo means eggs, they lay eggs. Ovoviv means eggs, but then the birth alive, so to speak. So they lay eggs, but the eggs will be developed inside of the fish body, and then viviparous give the live birth, so to speak. Mammals are viviparous. So that's another thing which developed on multiple occasions in the different groups of the organisms, up to 40 different groups of organisms, well, not simultaneously, independent from each other, come up with the idea of giving the birth to the young ones, to give that particular embryo further development. And of course, protection from the dehydration and so on and so forth. All right, and then of course, rays and skates are oviparous. They lay eggs, and you will see in the lab next time. They are also known as a mermaid. The common name is mermaid purses because they have an intricate shape and looks kind of like the purse. And then, well, who might have a purse in the ocean? Well, apparently mermaids. So here we go. Now looking at the creature itself, the anatomy is very, well, relatively simple. One of the very important things, they still have a gill slits, but the gill slits do not have the closer part, they're known as the operculum, which might ventilate the gills as we will have it in the bony fish. So shark, in order to get the water into the gills, have to swim. Okay, constant, pretty much. Whenever the shark's sleeping, it's still swimming because it have to aerate its gills. If you ever seen the shark, either a videos or a live one, you will see that whenever it's swimming, it has a mouth half open. So the water gets in and then come out through the gill slits. As a result, the gills will get that particular oxygen. So basically, and one of the problems with the shark, when they get entangled in a fish net, what will happen? They stop swimming. They literally suffocate. They drown. Interesting, right? The fish drowns. Yes, not enough oxygen. It cannot get enough oxygen because it stops swimming. So that's the respiratory system. Quite acute senses. The vision is not one of them. That's one of the main reasons why we have so many attacks by the great white sharks on the swimmers, because since the shark does not really see that well, great white specifically, it mistaking a swimmer or surfer, what have you, for its favorite meal, which is the seals, another mammal. And then this is why the reason why some of the people survived the attack of the great white shark. Why? Because it gives a bite, and then it's like, hey, I'm not that hungry. It does not taste. That seal, human, does not taste. We do not taste good for the shark. So quite often, if it's like, I'm not that hungry, it's weird seal, tastes weird, I don't want to eat it. Well, of course, if it's super hungry, then eat it. And as soon as it eats, it goes through the, we have the mouth. Through the mouth, it goes into the esophagus, stomach, digestion. Then there is the, of course, we'll have the intestine, where most of the digestion and absorption occurs. They have a fully developed kidney as the excretory system, spleen, so a typical fish anatomy. But again, the gill slits are kind of passive. They're not active. They cannot get or in most of the cases, they cannot get the oxygen from the water unless the organism is moving. All right, so here we have some of the examples. A famous great white shark. This creature, known as a whale shark, is very, well, it's basically harmless. It has a fairly large mouth. It goes with the mouth open and catches pretty much any kind of plankton, zooplankton specifically. So if you'll ever be in Cancun area, especially like, well, there's an island pretty much right across the Cancun on the Isla Mujeres. There they have in kind of June, July time, that they have the trips to go and either dive or even snorkel with the great white, oh, not great white shark. I'm sorry. No, that would be with the whale sharks. Very, very interesting. A couple of years ago, before that COVID started, me and my sons, we were spending pretty much the summer in Mexico, and me and my older one, he is 15 now, he was 13, 14. No, he was like 12 back then. We went to snorkel, and the little one says no. He was kind of afraid that the shark will think that he is the zooplankton and it will eat him. So he decided not to. And then of course stingrays and the manta rays and the great white shark and so on. So yeah, just kind of gives you the varieties. There is also another group of creatures known as the chimeras holocephalus. As you can see, looks very similar to the shark. However, most of those particular creatures lives in a very, very deep ocean, as a result quite often referred as the ghost sharks. And the chimera of course is the mythological creature, which basically different parts of it was made out of different parts of the creature. So this one from the different creatures, so to speak. So this one, the head looks very different from the body, so it's like an eclectic assemblage of that. So most of the sharks have a streamlined body, very swift swimmers, have very acute senses. Again, the vision is not one of them, but the smell or taste, which is pretty much the same if you go into aquatic environment, are extremely powerful. They also have the electrical sensors, they have the pressure sensors of the waves, and so on and so forth. So very acute senses, extremely successful group of animals, which, by the way, did not evolve much, I mean, change over a period of time for the last 150 or so millions of years. Yes, minute changes, the shapes, how they look like, but generally the overall design didn't change much at all. So another kind of living fossil group. So now, next group, known as the bony fish. Bony fish will be subdivided into two very large classes: Actinopteridae, ray-finned fishes, and Sarcopteridae, known as the lobe-finned fishes. If you'll think about any kind of fish, or most except with sharks and skates, salmon, tuna, take your pick in seafood restaurant, mahi-mahi, any of trout, sea bass, carp, or anything like that. All of those are Actinopteridae, ray-finned fishes. Okay, basically looking at the fin, and the bones in the fin comes out as an array. Okay, this is the largest group of all of the vertebrates, not only but all of the vertebrates, about 40,000 species in that particular group. Okay, versus about 5,000 of mammals. And then there is this much smaller group known as the Sarcopteridae, and there we have two subclasses, coelacanths and lungfishes. And that particular group, lungfishes, most likely give us the branch, well, the ancestral lungfishes, not the modern one, but ancestral lungfishes most likely give us the branch to the terrestrial, to the amphibians. I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, let's kind of take a look on what we have in the bony fish anatomy. Same kind of idea. Have a brain, acute senses. As a matter of fact, brain is much larger than, well, for the fish, than any other groups of the animals before the fish. It's bigger than the brain of tunicates, definitely bigger than the brains of hemichordates or insects or anything like that. Of course, the amphibian's brain is bigger, and then the mammal's brain is bigger, but at some point of time, whenever they just evolved, they were the smartest creatures back then, so to speak. Same kind of idea, mouth. From mouth, the food gets into the esophagus, stomach, intestine, same kind of idea. One of the very important things, here they have a gills, which is covered by a special plate known as the operculum. We'll talk about that in the lab. And the operculum can move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, creating the flow of water through the gills. As a result, the fish can now stand without much of the problem, just moving those particular bony plates covering the gills and creating the flow of water for the gills, so it can extract the oxygen. Also with the sharks, the density of the shark is higher than the density of the water, because they have that's a cartilage fish, of course. It weighs heavier than water, so to speak. Meaning what? As soon as the shark stops, it will literally start sinking down. So that's another thing why the sharks always swim. Anyway, and why they sinking down? Because they don't have that particular thing known as a swimming bladder. Swimming bladder is a chamber which is filled up with the gases. It's coming out from the esophagus. It branches out from the esophagus. All right. And it's filled up with a mixture. As a result, it will help in regulating of buoyancy of the fish. If the fish needs to go higher, it will increase the amount of gases from the blood. Carbon dioxide goes in there. As a result, the bladder will increase in size, so the fish will go up. All right. Now, if it needs to go down, become heavier, so to speak, the gases will be expelled. It can literally exhale, so to speak. It's not lungs yet, but get rid of excess of the gases, and the fish will go down deeper, up, down. So that one helps with the buoyancy. So in this particular case, it can literally stand if needed somewhere in the water, and that is very important part. See how it comes out from the esophagus? Yeah, that's important. Why? Because later on we'll talk about the lungfish, where this particular part, the swim bladder, now not only helping them to swim, but also helping them in extreme cases to get the oxygen. That's, as far as we understand, the first step toward our lungs. All right. We'll talk more about the anatomy of basic anatomy fish in the lab, and I think you have also a virtual lab for the dissection, right? The perch dissection, something like that. So during the Devonian, roughly 350 millions of years ago, bony fish give rise to Actinopteridae and Sarcopteridae. Sarcopteridae give us coelacanths. It's a group of fish. So we have the fish, and these ones are lobe fin fishes. They have a very characteristic, very meaty fins. I'll show it to you momentarily, and you understand what I'm talking about. Modern lungfishes swim bladder modified and can be used now as the organ to get the oxygen out of pure air. Basically, it's a primitive lung. So let's kind of go over that. So osteoichthys, osteos means bone, ichthys means fish. So bony fish, most diverse, largest group, skeleton made out of bones, have a different types known as the cyclod scales. We're not going over that much. Again, paired fins, scales used for protection and also help them with the hydrodynamics, so to speak. Swimming nicely, has a bony flap over the gills known as operculum, which allows them, which allows the gills to get fresh water on a regular basis. Have a swim bladder, very important, because again, gas content can be changed. The result, it might change the buoyancy. So it helps with the buoyancy of the fish. Go up, go down, stay at the particular spot. Now, vast majority, well, the largest majority of all of the vertebrates, we already talked about that, have a bony skeletons, and pretty much all of them aquatic. Some of them can kind of get on for temporarily on wet areas, but not so long. Again, the structure, that's a trout, and again, we're looking at the esophagus, and see, this is where the swimming bladder coming out. All right, and then we have the stomach, a fairly large intestine, because again, length of the intestine, this is where most of the digestion and absorption occurs. Whatever is not digested will be removed from the body. Now, here we're looking at all of the ray fin fishes, the tuna, the clownfish, this particular seahorse, the moray eels, any kind of eels. Like I said, salmon, trout, all of those are basically osteichthyes or bony fish. Once again, you go into any restaurant, you basically ordering, unless you're ordering shark, and there is only few restaurants carry shark. Shark meat, especially fresh shark meat, does not taste really good. It needs to be marinated specifically quite often overnight in the milk or something like that, because many of the sharks will have a high level of urea deposit in the meat, well, in the muscles, so it will be heavier than the water, so it can sink. As a result, if you catch a shark, do the steak right away, it will taste, in most of the sharks, it will not taste good. So anyway, so these ones are the largest group of all of the vertebrates. Now the next one, so again, fins are supported by a flexible ray. So you have a fin, and then the bones are coming out in a ray pattern. So the interesting group, which is much smaller of those. Look at those particular fins. That's a coelacanth, something which is known as the a group known as the Sarcopteridae, also known as the lobe fin fishes. Muscular pectoral fins, pectoris means the chest fins, right? And in this particular case, if you'll start looking right there, there is literally 5, 6 bones coming out. So we are looking at a very, very, very similar structure as the very first theropods the amphibians have. And those particular fins help them to sometimes slide on the ground, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So this one, coelacanth, also known as the something which is known as the living fossils. As you can see, this one is alive, and I'll tell you a quick story on that. So here we go. Coelacanths and landfishes pre-adapted life on land. They kind of pre-adapted. They had the ability to survive on those particular on the wet environment. All of that happened about 300 million of years ago. Again, Carboniferous period, high oxygen levels in the atmosphere, very wet, very humid environment. So we start seeing some of the fish slowly start crawling on land. Why? The question is why? That's a great question. As far as we understand, 2 main reasons. Reason number 1, less competition. There was no large predators on the land at that particular time. At least there was no large predators, the vertebrate predators, unlike in the ocean. And second of all, plenty of food. We already had the plants growing on dry land, and we start seeing some of the arthropods showing up on the dry land. So now you have the areas, you have food, almost no competition. So some of them start going on the dry land, and over a period of time they completely left the water. So here we're looking at the coelacanth. And at some point of time, we knew, like 100 years ago, we knew coelacanths only as the complete fossils. They were a relatively common fish roughly 200 or so millions of years ago. And the Museum of Great Britain, many of the natural museums, had the fossils of the coelacanth. Until like 1930s, one of the, I think that was librarian lady, she was double in ichthyology, which is science about the fish, and she usually were going to a local fisherman to check the catch of the day. And one of the fishermen, one of the days, called her up, and he said that I have something very, very interesting for you. And he brought what we know now as a coelacanth. The lady didn't know that it's a coelacanth at that time. Again, that's almost, well, a little bit under 100 years ago. So no internet, no no fast communications. But she created, well, she drew this particular the outline of the fish, including a very artistic tail. And she took the drawing and sent it to her friend who lived, and we're talking about the southeast side of Africa. So she sent it to her friend who also was the geologist or interested in archaeology as the hobby. And she said, well, there is a fish which looks like this, and I think it's something interesting. And that was, of course, not the email, not the phone call. It was a regular snail mail, so to speak. So by the time the friend responded, most of the fish was already in a really bad shape. She didn't preserve it, essentially. And she first coelacanth, a live coelacanth, which has been captured, basically has been lost. He said, definitely something new. Make sure that you will get another one, and this is how you need to preserve. And the coelacanth has been rediscovered. The fish, which did not change for the last 200 or so millions of years. Still, as you can see, you can find them. It's not a very common fish, but still a fish which you can find in the ocean, in basically Indian Ocean nowadays, a living fossil. But now, let's kind of take a look on the same different group, that's a Sarcopteridae, and let's kind of take a look on those fish. You see, those very, very meaty fins. Those ones are known as the dipnoi. They usually live in the tropical areas. This one is the Proteros. I don't really remember what's the name of that one from Australia. This one lives in Africa. And what in Africa they have? They live in Australia. They live in a relatively shallow lakes. So during the rain season, those particular lakes are filled up with water. Everything is fine. Fish behaves as a fish, all good. During the dry season, many of those particular lakes will start going down or drying out almost completely. That particular guy, what it will do, it will create a cocoon in the mud. So it will burrow itself in the mud, will create a cocoon out of the mud and the mucus with a tiny little bit opening. And if the lake will dry out completely, now what it will do, it will switch from the breathing with the gills into breathing with the modified swimming bladder. So dipnoi, lungfishes, the swimming bladder is modified or has been modified in order to get oxygen straight from the atmosphere. That particular guy has a similar idea even further. They can close down the operculum to protect the gills during the dry season. And they literally can slither they out from one lake or from one stream, drying out stream, into another on land, using the lobe fins to move, to slide over. And this is what we think might happen a long time ago when we start seeing that the wet environment started changing into a relatively dry environment. So here we have tetrapods, which will have limbs and feet. So we are talking about amphibians, we're talking about reptiles, including birds and of course mammals. So 4 limbs with the digits, they have a years as adaptation for the airborne sound, and this is what one of those particular things might look like if initial, something which is known as a T colic. You'll see the model or the artist representation of the T colic on the next, I think it's the next slide. But basically what we see is kind of fishy structures, but now we start looking at those lobe fins and look, 1 bone, 2 bones, and bunch of bones and pieces. So we still have the bones supporting the gills, and this particular creature, here we go, T colic, see, looks very similar to what we are looking at nowadays at the dipnoi, double well, lungfishes. Again, the head is almost amphibian, but the body is still almost fish. So kind of two things overall. And then, of course, we start seeing that more and more they start spending time on dry land. Again, more resources there, less competition. But in this particular case, the creatures have to go back to the water in order to reproduce. And this is where we start looking at creation or evolution of the amphibians. And as you can see, that happened somewhere around 350 or so millions ago from the Devonian, the age of fish. We start going into a Carboniferous. Carboniferous, again, very wet environment, high level of the oxygen. So amphibians will have relatively primitive lungs, and a lot of part of the oxygen they will literally get from the skin. Now, here, roughly 300 millions of years ago, we had a very interesting period known as the Permian. At the end, there will be a Permian extinction. So in this particular case, Permian characterized by combining of those continents into a supercontinent Pangea. As a result, we start seeing that a lot of excuse me, a lot of area become very dry. So, and this is where we start seeing the rise of the reptiles, including the dinosaurs, including birds, and then one of the branches give us the mammals. So anyway, amphibians. First vertebrates to inhabit land for most of the time. Some of them are still completely aquatic, but they have 4 limbs, about 5,000 species, have moist skin, as I told you before, to complement the lungs. Lungs are very simple. So in order to get more oxygen, they're using skin to absorb straight from the skin. They have something which is known as a 3-chamber heart. We'll talk about the evolution of the heart among the vertebrates a little bit later, but basically fish will have 2 chambers, the atrium and the ventricle. Now, as soon as we start seeing the amphibians, as soon as we start seeing movement from the water into a dry land, amphibians have a 3-chamber heart, 2 atriums, 1 ventricle. Then we'll have the reptiles. They will have kind of 3.5. They will have 2 atriums, 1 ventricle, but within a ventricle it will have a separation. So whenever the ventricle contracts, the septum, the separation, the fold inside of it will separate the right side and the left side, venous blood and arterial blood, deoxygenated, oxygenated blood. So it's not mixing. In the amphibians, it does mix fairly well. And then, of course, in the birds as well as the mammals, we have a 4-chamber heart. We have 2 atriums, 2 ventricles. The deoxygenated and oxygenated blood completely separated. Right now, there is the ideas that some of the dinosaurs, specifically the higher evolved dinosaurs like T-Rexes, etc., might have a 4-chamber heart. More than that, they most likely were warm-blooded creatures. So, but we'll talk about that in a greater details a little bit later. And amphibians have to double life. They have to go to the water in order to use. They cannot do that without the sperm require the water to swim and fertilize the egg. So several groups, salamanders, known as the tailed one. There is a group known as the tailless frogs and toads, and then there is the caecilians, which are interesting group, relatively small, and they look like worms. That's a very interesting. I'll show you the pictures of that. So Urodelia. Urodelia means tailed ones. Those ones are considered to be one of the most primitive amphibians, because in this particular case, most of them are dependent on water. They either live in an extremely wet environment or humid environment, or in some cases, like many of the newts, they do not, or salamanders, they do not leave the water. They live in the water, and many of them will possess gills as the adults as well. So they're not using lungs per se or much. Next one known as Anura, and that's a tailless. We're talking about frogs as well as the toads. They do not have a diaphragm. Remember, diaphragm is the muscular dome which separates our thoracic cavity and abdominal cavity, and extremely important in breathing. We have something which is known as a negative pressure breathing. We'll talk about that when we'll discuss the respiratory system. Those particular guys have a positive pressure breathing, meaning they literally swallow the air. Since they don't have the diaphragm, they're gulping the air. Now, very important part, this thing known as the keratinized skin. Keratin is the type of the protein, hair keratin, nails made out of keratin. Most of our skin is made out of keratin, meaning what? Keratin is waterproofing the skin. That's a step towards surviving on a dry land without water whatsoever. And again, water is extremely important for the dry land creatures. Think about it. Without the food, for how long you can survive without the food? Months and a half, not a huge problem. I mean, there will be problems naturally, but you can survive without food, just have water, without food for about 40 to 50 days. Without water, how long a typical human being can survive without water? Under a week. 3 to 5 days. Maybe a week if you drink a lot of water right before that. But yeah, water is extremely important. So preventing the water loss through the keratinization of skin. Yet they have to go back to lay eggs, and then the eggs will go through the metamorphosis. Remember, the eggs will hatch in a tadpole, and then tadpole will change overall in a little froglet, right? In this particular case, a very important similar idea as the insects, metamorphosis. Why do they need to do that? Tadpoles are mostly herbivores. Most of the frogs are actually predators, right? Insectivores and such. So separation of the food sources, so they're not competing. The larvae is not competing with the adults, or adults not competing with the larvae stage. So here we're looking at the Sicilian. Apoda, sometimes referred as apoda, legless. They completely lost the legs. They lost most of their senses. I mean, not eyes, not very well developed brain or anything like that. And if you look right there, they're long, kind of. But you can say it looks like an earthworm, and I agree with you completely, because they're doing pretty much the same function. They live in the tropical areas, in the forest floor, and they do pretty much everything what the regular earthworm do. But if you cut it open, you will find the bones, you will find the structures which brings them to this particular group. Here we're looking at the reproduction. A female lay eggs, male right next to it will release the sperm simultaneously. As a result, the sperm will go and fertilize as many eggs as possible. Later on, from the egg will look the larvae stage known as a tadpole. So in this particular case, it looks like a fish, has a fish tail. Everything looks as a fish. Again, showing off the stages of the ancestry. Then over a period of time, the tadpole will start growing the legs, and it will start looking very similar like a fish with the legs. And then of course, they'll reduce in size and will be completely gone by the time it will come out on the dry land. Those ones lives in the water. Those ones live in the water. Whenever it's ready to come out, we have quite a few of those little tadpole, little froglets running around. I have on the back of my property, I have a little creek coming out. So periodically I do have those froglets jumping around in the grass to a surprise to my dog. Oh, well, to my dog. Dog like, what's that? What's that? There's a bunch of them running in the grass. So here we go. So eggs, lack of internal fertilization. Fertilization is external. The sperm and the egg have to be laid in the water. So tadpoles, metamorphosis, and finally adult creature. So again, we'll have two different things. Tadpole is basically herbivores, while the theropod, the adult one, is carnivorous or the predator. All right. Those guys don't have the lungs yet. They live through the gills. Well, they get the oxygen through the gills. That guys will start having, then they start going on the dry land. So remember the Permian, dry land. So we are start looking at the creatures which start adapting to extreme dry environment. First of all, skin needs to be prevented so the creature will not dry out. Yesterday, my son came out, younger one who is in junior high right now. He's like, Papa, did you know that if you'll skin the human being, I'm like, that's not a really good conversational topic, but please continue here. Like, without the skin, the person can survive for about 6 or so hours. I'm like, yes, and what he or she will die from? It's like drying out. This is what the skin helps us with, not to lose too much water. And again, if you have some sort of like a severe burn victim where 80 or 100% of the skin, God forbid, has been burned, but that person will die most likely from, not from the pain, we have drugs for that, most likely not from any kind of bacterial infection because we have drugs for that, but from desiccation, losing too much water, as a result multiple organ failure, and the person is dead. So one of them were to protect the dehydration, another how to get the sperm to the egg without the water. Internal fertilization. Next step in the theropods would be how to protect embryo from the development, from drying out during the development, I should say, not from the development, but during the development, from the dehydration, and they come up with the enhanced egg which has quite a few layers. So we have the embryo, food source for the embryo. Does it remind you something? Yes, plants at the same time had exactly the same problem. How in the world we will protect the embryo? And they come up with a seed. This is like a seed for animals. It's not a seed, very different origin, but the same idea. Embryo, food source, the area where the waste will be dropped out or dropped in, and then a fairly hard shell to prevent the embryo from drying out. We're not going deep into those layers, what they represent, etc., etc. Don't have time for that. Zoology. In zoology, we're talking at much deeper. But in this particular case, you need to understand that we have the embryo, we have the food source for that, and then it will have several layers. Usually, they have several layers to prevent that tender embryo from drying out. Extremely, extremely important. And then, of course, we have to have the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchanging. So it have to be porous, but not porous, too much porous. Otherwise, it will start losing the water, and then the embryo will die. And this is what we're looking at, the amniotes. Ancestral amniote, and a mix between the amphibian and reptile, give us two very distinct branches. Both of them are technically considered reptiles. The reptiles, well, the ancestral reptiles, which give us diapsids. Basically, it depends on how many openings or holes in the skull they have. And the diapsids diversified into what we know as nowadays alligators and crocodiles, all of the dinosaurs, including the birds and few other dinosaurs, not technically dinosaurs like Ichthyosaurus, Plesiosaurus, Tuatros, very interesting creature which is still alive, another living fossil, and then the snakes as well as the lizards. And then, well, of course, we have a very different group known as the turtles. They are apparently, well, we're not really sure where exactly they come off. Are they archosaurs or they are slightly different group? That's the diversity. And then there was a reptile-looking creatures which took a very different approach to the surviving of the embryos, and we ended up with the mammals. And again, it's not a straight line, of course. It had quite a few different trials and errors. All right, so vertebrates adaptation to a terrestrial life. Make sure you know that. It will be on the test. Amniotic egg. Protect the embryo from drying out. Body covering. Protect the adult from drying out. And then the physiological mechanism to conserve water. We'll talk about that in much greater details in the during the excretory system. But in this particular case, started at the end of the Carboniferous period and diversified during the drying out, the general drying out era, which was the Permian era. All right, so reptiles. And here, please know that this is class. It's a single class, yet we should break it apart at least in 3 or 4 different ones. Lizards and snakes should be separate. Turtles should be separate. Crocodilians, alligators and crocodiles and such, cavials, should be caimans, should be separate classes. They should be at different classes, or maybe even more than the class. And we don't really have, well, biologists, zoologists specifically, don't have the exact, and the birds should be here as well. We don't really have the full understanding, and there is quite a few debates still going on. As a result, for now, for simplicity's sake, we're keeping it as a single class, even though it's a polyphyletic, meaning that the different groups, lizards and snakes, turtles and crocodilians, come up at the different times from the different ancestors. We kind of combine it for simplicity, historical sake. About 7,000 species, comparatively to almost 40,000 or over 40,000 of fish. And they have quite a few things. Remember the keratinization of the skin. Now keratinization is complete, so they don't even have, like, we have quite a few glands in our like sweat gland and oil glands in our skin. They don't. So they are completely waterproof, prevent water loss from the organism. They do egg, meaning that the embryo is no longer developing in an aquatic environment. They can literally lay eggs on the sand or in the sand and wait for them to develop. Internal fertilization. The sperm delivered to the egg directly, female and male gametes. So males have to find the female, and they will have something which is known as a process through the process of copulation. So reproduction independently of water. Again, remember, those particular guys were evolving when there was not much of the water sources in a huge continent. Considered to be something which is known as a cold-blooded. It's not really a cold-blooded. For most of the reptiles, the temperature of the body depends on the temperature of the environment. We'll talk a little bit more about that during the next unit. They can regulate the body temperature, like be either on the sun and warm it up, or go back in the shade or anything like that. But also some of the reptiles, particularly dinosaurs, probably had they were warm-blooded. Probably. Not 100% sure, but there is quite a few indirect facts or indirect details which pointing out that at least some of the dinosaurs were warm-blooded, and right now we're looking at the birds, which are essentially survived dinosaurs, and they definitely warm-blooded creatures. Nutritional requirements are much lower. Think about a huge snake like a boa, right? My size about, well, by my size, my weight about 170, 180, 200 pounds. A boa will eat a rabbit or two and will be happy for the next 2-3 weeks, no problem whatsoever. Will not be hungry, will be very, very lethargic, like, oh, I'm full for the next 2 weeks. If I'll eat a rabbit, well, preferably cooked, of course. If I'll eat the rabbit 2 days later, I will like, well, I need some more. Where's my food? I definitely, yeah. 2 weeks later on one rabbit, the snake is still very, very happy, and I will not be happy at all, or human being. So class reptiles is paraphyletic, including the dinosaurs, and quite often the birds will be added there. Tuatras, I'll talk about the tuatras. It's basically a lizard-looking creature, which is much more closely related to essentially dinosaurs than any other creatures. Lizard and snakes, turtles, and alligators. Birds sometimes included with the dinosaurs. Once again, there is a huge disconnect, or there is a huge debates over that. Again, most of them are cold-blooded. The birds are considered to be warm-blooded. So here we have example of the a lizard, of course. So internal fertilization, shell around the egg to protect the embryo. So in this particular case here, what we're looking at the embryo, food source, and then there is a several major shells, right? They have a dry skin with a horny scales, again, mostly made out of keratin to prevent from dehydration. Lungs with many chambers, should say chambers, typo. So lungs with many chambers, much more efficiently, no longer using skin as the amphibians did to get the oxygen, and 3-chamber heart with the septum, separation in the middle. So whenever the ventricle contracts, it's separating oxygen-rich and oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. We'll talk about that during the circulatory system unit lecture. So all those reptilian fossils about 300 millions of years ago. And then during the Permian, they actually flourish. And the next, well, Permian ended up like 265 millions of years ago. We had the huge Permian extinction, and whoever survived went into a Mesozoic era, the Middle Era. And the Middle Era was era of the reptiles. The mammals showed up a little bit later on, and they spent almost 150 millions of years under the influence of the reptiles. During the Mesozoic era, the radiation of the reptiles, the diversification of the reptiles, all of those dinosaurs roaming around, they didn't give the chance for the mammals to diversify. They kept them at bay, relatively small, and most of them are nocturnal creatures as our ancestors, which was a blessing in disguise, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So again, diapsids were diversifying. Diapsids composed of 2 main lineages, Archosaurus and Lepidosaurus. It's basically a little bit classification of the dinosaurs or reptiles per se. But here we have some of the dinosaurs, right? Everybody knows about that. And there is a group of the dinosaurs which known as the lizard hip dinosaurs, and there is a group of dinosaurs known as the bird hip, depending on the structure of the hip bones. If it looked like a lizard hip, it's a lizard hip dinosaur. But if it looked like a bird hip, it's a bird hip dinosaurs. What's really interesting, the birds themselves belong to the group which evolved from the lizard hip dinosaurs. Yeah, I know. Traditionally, dinosaurs considered to be slow, kind of sluggish creatures. Apparently, it was not the case. Many of them were taking care of the little ones, young ones. There was a parental care. Some of them, like velociraptors, were hunting in packs. And to tell you the truth, if you'll give me a choice to face the pack of velociraptors versus a T-Rex, I will face the T-Rex. Velociraptors, even though they were much smaller, much more vicious, very smart, extremely dangerous creatures. Extremely, and they were a very fast-moving creatures as well. So parental care, of course, laying eggs, the herding behavior, all of that were showing us a fairly high development. Of course, not as big as the mammals. Here we're looking at another living creature known as a tuatra. See, looks like some sort of iguana, right? A lizard, but it's not. Based on whatever the structure of its skulls, it's not close related to the lizards. That one, there is one thing, yes, two species of tuatras which can be found in the Hobbit land, which is the Hobbit land, which is New Zealand. Out of coast of New Zealand, there is two small islands, and this is where you can find those unique creatures because they evolved along with the dinosaurs. They arise about 150 millions of years ago, and they still survive. They're still alive, even though most of the dinosaurs died 65 millions of years ago during whatever the catastrophe we had. Well, this is a moloch, of course, Australian, and the lizards as well as the snakes. That's a living lineage. Dinosaurs, unless you count birds as the dinosaurs died off, but the lizards as the snakes are survived, and that's the most numerous diverse reptiles. We're looking at the snakes, and of course they evolved from lizards. We have some of the snakes which continue to have like a primitive or remainders of the hip bones, and even a small tiny well, not legs per se, but very structures which basically supposed to evolve into your legs, but they don't. And then, of course, we have the turtles and the tortoises. What's really important that the shell is actually fused with the backbone. So none of the turtles, despite whatever the cartoon showing you, none of the turtles can get out of the shell and come back like in a house. No, they cannot do that. In order to do that, it will literally have to rip the backbone out. So that doesn't really happen. And then, of course, very distinct today, they adapted to the aquatic. Some of them are lives in the deserted area, dry lands, etc. So we have a few semi-aquatic creatures right here, red cheek tortoises. And then, of course, if you go on a Galveston, you might hear or might even see the sea turtles which laying eggs. So here are some of the painted turtle, musk turtle, yes, map turtle, and so on and so forth. Turtles, we have those ones here. So lizard and snakes, again, one of the largest ones, can grow up to 6 feet long. We're talking about the Komodo dragons, right? That's the largest out of all of the lizards. Can be herbivores, can be carnivores, might get into a hibernation during the unfavorable groups. We're talking about, well, unfavorable seasons, either too hot or too cold. And then we have the leopard gecko, and all this is the Komodo dragon. So quite interesting groups. We're not going too deep into that. We'll discuss some of those things in the lab as well. And then, of course, the North American snakes here in the Houston area. We have all of the venomous, not poisonous, venomous snakes can be found of North America, can be found here in the Houston area. Copperheads are quite common, right? The water moccasins, occasionally you can run into the coral snake, etc. And then rattlesnakes are quite common as well. Then the crocodilians, alligators, we have them around here periodically as if you really want to go and watch the alligators at the natural habitat. There is a state park, Brothers Bend State Park, that quite often, well, not quite often, they have those alligators. You will see it if you are on the trail, no problem whatsoever. Mostly aquatic reptiles, tropical climates, yes, and closest related to dinosaurs. Again, if you're not counting the birds. And here we're looking at the alligator, quite bathing in the sun, but can jump out relatively fast, right? So little ones, and then alligator versus a crocodile. Crocodile usually have a little bit not as wide a snout as the alligator, and then of course alligators here, crocodiles is an old world, so to speak, Africa and such. So feathered dinosaurs, very interesting. One of the creatures which has been the picture known as the Archaeopteryx still will have and that's the artist representation of the Archaeopteryx. As you can see, on one hand looks like a bird, but on another hand still has a teeth. None of the modern birds have a teeth in the beak or anything like that. So some of the scientists saying that yes, it was the beginning of the birds. The other scientists saying no, it was the bird-looking creature which died off and it didn't give us anything. So we still don't know which one is true. So here we're going. Here's we're talking about the creature. On one hand, looks like the feathery stuff, right? On another hand, that's the velociraptor. If you watched any of those Jurassic Park, this is how the velociraptors, as well as the T-Rexes, were looking like. Most likely they had some sort of feathery cover. Why? Were they able to fly? No, God, no. But they were, well, the feathers were covering them for better aerodynamics, and then of course for better heat exchange. So birds, a next group, considered to be a separate class right now. Again, very close to the reptilians, specifically dinosaurs, but one of the, yes, they are a group of Archosaurus, the dinosaurs, so to speak, with the, and they most likely come out about, what, 150 to 100 millions of years ago from the same group which give us the velociraptors as well as the T-Rexes. So in this particular case, they have lots of reptilian anatomy, but one of the very important parts of the reptilian anatomy has a very specific modification, adaptation to flight. And by the flight, we're talking about a very hollow bones, very light bones. They do have a highly specialized feathers, again, to create that particular aerodynamic shape of the birds. So they do have the front front has been modified into the wings. So most likely all carnivorous dinosaurs evolved into the modern birds. So roughly 150 millions of years ago, we're not really there is a debate, is the Archaeopteryx is the oldest bird, or was it a separate dead end of, and see it's sitting on a ginkgo tree, because the ginkgos were quite common during that particular time. Living birds will be subdivided into two very distinct groups known as raties, which are flightless whatsoever, emus, ostriches, etc. And they never were, the ancestors didn't fly, they all flightless, a largest out of them all, essentially. And then we have the demand for flight as a result of generally smaller bodies, lighter bodies, streamlined bodies, and then of course the lots of feathers. So quite a few. They have a modification on the food structures based on what exactly doing in the environment, but essentially for the birds we have the feathers, wings, light and hollow bones, four-chambered heart, a very efficient lungs. As a matter of fact, the lungs are more efficient than the mammals' lungs, and then of course they are all warm blood, right? Because of the high metabolic rate requiring for flying. Constant body temperature. The body temperature is typically higher than ours. Metabolic waste are combined, the urine, so to speak, and the feces combined together, and they are semi-solid, meaning that the water will be extracted at the highest amount of a very high level, much higher than, again, than mammals. Very well developed nervous system, very nice sensors, the eyes, most of them will be able to see the colors and so on and so forth. Excellent vision, excellent hearing, excellent smell. So all of those are very important. Evolved again from Mesozoic. Feathers made out of keratin, same structure, can be used for insulation, flight, and so on and so forth. So there is all types of the feathers. As you can see, some of them are modified for for flying. The down is modified to keep the insulation layers, etc. Beaks along with the feet will be highly developed and depends on what kind of food they are having. So usually have one ovary, and the egg, the single fertilized or unfertilized eggs, the one with eggs you are eating, is actually a single cell, unfertilized eggs, and therefore that's a huge one, right? And we'll talk about the gizzard and abdomen and beak a little bit later. Again, beak is made out of keratin again. So beak made out of keratin provide very adaptable structure, depends on the food sources. So same kind of idea, typical reptilian egg with the embryo food source, and then the layers protecting the embryo from drying out. So again, feeds, modern birds, about 9,000 species. Two general groups. Already talk about the flightless, known as Vertebrates. No sternal keel. The keel, the breastbone. In the flight ones, creating the breastbone, creating a very large bone known as the keel. And that particular keel, this is where the pectoral muscles will be, breast muscles will be coming out for the flying. Think about if you ever tried chicken, and I presume you did, or soon will have something which known as the Thanksgiving, the white meat. White meat will be attached to a very large bone that's known as the keel. And this is for the strong breast muscles attached. But the flightless ones don't have that. And then, of course, the modern birds known as the carniates, perching birds, passive forms, basically the closest ones or close relatives of the sparrows. They do have that particular very large, enlarged breastbone, sternal keel, in order to support or help with the attachment of the flying muscles. Next group known as the mammals. Like I said, we'll go a little bit over the lecture time, but they will be much shorter. So about 5,000 species, diversified greatly after the extinction of dinosaurs. For almost 150 millions of years during the Mesozoic era, the mammalians were there, but they stayed small. Small, we're talking about like opossum-like or rat-like, shrew-like creatures. And dinosaurs were not giving them the chance to diversify. They were eating them. As a result, many of the mammals switched to something which is known as a nocturnal type of life. Nocturnal means they were active at night. Dinosaurs were not very active at night. Those ones were active at night. At night, whenever you are active at night, you have to have much more sensors. You have to have a better vision, better hearing, better smell, and so on. So as a result, it gives us, well, more sensors you have, bigger brain you have. As a result of that, the brain of the mammals is the most developed brain out of them all. The brain of, let's say, ostrich, right? Anybody seen ostrich? At least if you go into any kind of zoo or anything like that, take a look on an ostrich. The eye of the ostrich is bigger than the brain of the ostrich. A single eye of an ostrich is bigger in size than the brain. Yet it's a very, well, considered to be a relatively smart creature. But because the dinosaurs kept our ancestors at bay for almost, well, for millions of years, they were slowly evolving a big brain. We become brainiacs of the vertebrates. And then whenever the dinosaurs extinct 65 millions of years ago, something happened, a meteorite, supervolcano, a meteorite, which supervolcano, whatever. So in this particular case, something happened. Most of the large forms, not only dinosaurs, but large forms, pretty much everything which was above 20 or so pounds died off. Our mammals stayed, well, our ancestors as a mammal stayed relatively small, so they survived. They survived and they start reproducing really fast, and they took over, and right now we live in the age of the mammals. So one of the things, mammalian characteristics, we can find it only in mammals. They have a hair, a long extensions made out of keratin again. So keratin, the amphibians started, and we just reusing the keratin for different, well, we as the animals, reusing keratins for the different purposes. Hair made out of keratin, hooves are made out of keratin, horns made out of keratin, nails, claws, beaks, feather, all of that made out of exactly the same protein. No, they can't. Then the mammalians will maintain the body temperature, and the hair or fur has to do just that. Then there is the very efficient respiratory system. Unlike amphibians, we have that particular diaphragm. Diaphragm goes down, the lungs will be inflating, something which is known as a negative pressure breathing. We'll discuss that a little bit later. And then, of course, it has a four-chamber heart, similar to the bird's separation of deoxygenated, the right side of the heart receiving, pumping the deoxygenated blood into the lungs, from the lungs the left side of the heart receiving oxygenated blood, and then it's pumping throughout the body. We'll discuss that two circuits of circulatory system a little bit later. This is what our ancestors at some point of time look like. Late Triassic period, you're looking like, that's look like a dinosaur. Yes, we started as the primitive reptiles / amphibians. As a matter of fact, there is several major traits like multicellular glands in our skin, the sweat glands, and then the oil glands, and the sweat glands will turn into a mammary glands, right? So milk is essentially what is sweat. Yes, technically, I'm drinking coffee with the milk. A very nutritious sweat, I know. So, well, one of the theories saying that the milk glands are kind of, they come out from the or enlarged sweat glands. But in this particular case, those creatures keeping some of the traits of the amphibians evolved very differently from the rest of the reptiles. And this is where it's talking the jaw joints, the structures of the inner ear. So there is quite a few important things, like the mammalian ear will have three smallest bones in your body is actually will be made in a mammalian, well, in the inner ear, right? We have a malleus, incus, and the stapes. So, and this is what those particular creatures start looking like, again, looking like dinosaurs. Still have scales, but most likely those scales start having some sort of hairs. And those particular dinosaurs went or evolved, it's not really a dinosaurs, it's a reptiles, ended up into that particular creature. And that particular creature has an interesting structure of the legs. Look, the legs are below the body, right? If you look at the cat, if you look at the dog of any, or think about the horse, the legs are below the body, right? Whenever you look at any kind of lizards or anything like that, they are to the side of the body. They're moving like this. We are moving like that. So that's a characteristics of mammals now. Another very interesting characteristics of mammal, the neck. The neck number of vertebrates in the neck for all of the mammals, no matter big or small, is 7. If you count the human vertebrates, 7 vertebrates. You'll go and find the giraffe, very long neck. Count the vertebrates, 7. You find a tiny little bitty mouse or shrew or anything like that, and you count the vertebrates, tiny little bitty ones, but still 7. So that was already kind of reptile plus or on the mammalian side. Start differentiating teeth. You start seeing the canines, for example, right? Most of the modern mammal placenta is a specific structure. We have an embryo creating a network of blood vessels, and the mother body creating a network of the blood vessels where they intertwine, but they do not merge. So what will happen, and this is particular structure known as a placenta, the nutrients, oxygen goes into the fetus blood, and the fetus blood drops out, or putting all of the waste and carbon dioxide. Mammary glands, already talk about that. Even the primitive reptile, even primitive mammals, such as known as the echidna, as well as the platypus, this is the mammals which actually eggs. But when the little one will hatch out, it will start feeding on milk. All right. There will be no mammary glands, specialized mammary glands anywhere on the body. The female abdomen will be producing milk overall. All right. Definitely showing the parental care for the offspring for quite some time, right? Highly developed nervous system. Remember, we're talking about the sensors. Nocturnal life, largest, a lot of sensors, largest brains of all of the vertebrates. We have a 3-bone middle ear. Then the muscular diaphragm, 7 neck braids, and differentiated teeth. We have the incisors, the canine, and premolars, molars, all of those particular, all of those we have for most of the mammals. All right. So let's kind of take a look convergent evolution. We're talking about the placental versus marsupial. So convergent means they start looking like because they function in the environment, right? And then, of course, Tasmanian wolves, we probably kill those guys, unfortunately. So monotromes, the very first group of the mammals which are kind of on a brink between the reptiles and the mammals. On one hand, they are mammals because they are producing milk and have fur, as you can see. But on another hand, this is the mammals which lay literally eggs. They are oviparous. They lay eggs, they wait for the eggs to hatch, and then they're feeding little ones with the milk. So mammary glands, but the mammary glands will be all over the abdomen male. And then males have the, well, for the platypus, male has the spur with the venom, etc. So here we're looking at the echidna. There is I think two species of the echidna, and you see, this is the egg and this is the little ones which is hatching out. So echidna, also known as a spiny anteater, porcupine-looking creature, can be found down in Australia as well as in New Zealand. Then there is another subclass known as the marsupials. We have those creatures here. We're talking about North America. You've seen them most likely, opossums. I have, well, back of my property is part of the opossum territory. One of the males, I presume, males walking around periodically, and I see him in the morning when I'm drinking the coffee, and letting the dog out, and he's kind of, we're not touching him, he's not touching us, but periodically, like around 5:45 or so, he's making around on his territory. So opossum, kangaroos, and koalas, most of them will be found in Australia, because everywhere else, they started everywhere else, but the placental were a more successful group, they kind of pushed them away. They do not develop the placenta, so there is no that particular intertwining of the blood vessels between the young ones, well, the embryo and the mother. So whenever they will be born, they are literally born super premature, tiny little bitty embryos, which literally making their way, they have to crawl into a specific pouch-like structures known as a marsupium, hence the name. And there, this is where they have the milk gland. So they're latching up on the literally teeth, and they're getting all the nutrients from the mother that way. So yes, you most likely seen those particular pictures. So young was born in a very early embryonic stage, and let me kind of show the picture. So here we go. The little one will be born literally like an embryo, but whenever it's born, it will have to make its way from the female genitalia into the marsupium. This is where it will hatch on the mammary gland, see all the nutrients from there, and looking at the kangaroos, wallabies, etc. So I think there is another picture which shows pretty much this. The picture, so the embryo inside of the marsupium, but it was already been born. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, humans in the development, we went kind of the same way as the marsupials did. Our embryo, well, our babies are born extremely helpless. They have to feed on the milk for quite some time, and then they had to be taught quite a lot of things. So here we have examples of the marsupials, the opossums, the kangaroos, koalas, right, which is I think it's on the coat of arms of Australia. Koala, the life of koala, just think about it. It sleeps for about 22 hours a day, right? Yes, that's already a good start. Then for about hour and a half, it's feeding itself, and another hour or half an hour, it basically does everything else, any kind of toiletries, try to find a mate, maybe a mate with someone, etc. So yes, the life is like, well, I'll sleep for 22 hours, I'll eat for 2 hours, done. So that's the marsupials. Now the placental. Placenta, this is the part of the placenta. You can see that here we go. The blood vessels of the fetus will create a network which literally will be right next to the maternal blood vessels. As a result, the blood do not exchange. Otherwise, the female blood, or specifically white blood cells, because the fetus has a different genetic code, I know half and half, but it has a different genes than a female, the white blood cells would be attacked. So it's very important to keep that blood separate. So in this particular case, embryonic happening completely in the uterus, in an organ known as the placenta, which will be basically disposed or discarded following the birth. In many cases, even let's say, many of the herbivores will eat, the female will eat placenta afterwards. Why? Couple of things. One of them, it's full of all kinds of nutrients and the hormones. And second of all, as far as we understand, eating the placenta will kind of help to prevent the predators smelling, finding the placenta and thinking, well, there is a placenta, so there will be a newborn somewhere around. If it's a newborn, then it will be fairly defenseless. Generally discarded following the birth, even though in some cultures they do consume placenta after the person is born. I know, strange part, but yeah. Anyway, it helps with the exchange of nutrients and the wastes and gases, etc. So some of the examples, right? The groundhogs, whitetail, that's the North American. That one, the jackalope, it's not real. Just telling you right away. I had student before arguing like, it is, I seen it. I'm like, you seen the actual live jackalope? He's like, no, but my friend has he has that thing in the garage. His stuffed animal. I'm like, somebody took the rabbit and put the antlers of it. She's like, no, no, it's not. I'm like, yeah, oh, okay, all right, well, take a look, do the research, but yeah, jackalope is not. I put it as the funny thing, and then I had that particular argument. So some more common American mammals, right? The black bear versus grizzly bear. A couple of years ago, I was visiting Yellowstone, and we were talking to. We talked to one of the rangers, and he pointed at the bear far away, a couple of miles away. You can see like a tiny little bit dot, and he's like, oh, that's a black bear. And I'm like, so how can you tell? He's like, oh, very simple. If you'll climb on a tree running away from the bear, and it's a joke part, of course, and he was waiting for that particular question. He's like, if the bear will start climbing on that particular tree, then it's a black bear. If the bear will start breaking the tree you're sitting on, that's a grizzly. So anyway, but yeah, they're quite different. The black bear is much darker. It's not really black. It's a very, very common. And then, of course, Sasquatch, Bigfoot. We're not really sure if it's a real or not real, a hominid, or which particular hominid. Lots of presumably sightings all over the world, but we haven't been able to find the creature itself. So here we have some of the Eutherians orders, and we're talking about the monotremes, and then of course we are talking about the marsupials, and then we're talking about the elephant and the relatives, and then the sirenas, and then the anteaters, and then the rabbits and the hares, and then carnivores. We're talking about the cats and dogs and such. And then we're talking about the adactys, so pair-hooved ones, and the that's the even-hooved ones, and the odd-hooved ones. And then, of course, the dolphins and the whales. And here we're looking at the marsupials, and the very interesting one known as the aardvark. And then Hyraxes. Hyraxes are actually close related to the elephants, if I remember correctly, and rodents, squirrels. You've probably seen the squirrels all over the primates. And then the this is a Perthia, means the odd-hooved ones, 1 or 3 hooves. So we're talking about the odd numbers of those. We're talking about the horses and rhinos, and the horses, of course, running only on one digit. I will not show it to you. It's considered they basically running on middle finger. The rest of the fingers are decreased in sizes. And then, of course, bats, and then any kind of insectivores. So primates, again, we'll talk about that. Ancestral primate, and eventually we're looking somewhere around 6 or 7 millions of years ago. The branches split between whatever will become a modern chimpanzee and whatever will become a modern human. There is about 0.5% of the DNA difference between us and the chimps. So yes, don't really go too deep into that. Yes, we will talk about that in the beginning. So primates, again, hands have a feet as well as a feet adapted to grasping. Later on, that particular opposable thumb were helpful to our ancestors to grab the primitive tools, of course. Brain, short jaws, forward-looking eyes instead of sideways. Many of the animals will have a sideways, like the dogs and cats, etc. They have it. Well, cats I have almost straight, but it gives them a little bit more view on the back, so to speak. The hare or rabbit, on another hand, they have eyes totally on the sides. As a result, they can see pretty much 180 around themselves. So here we're looking at the primates, Asia, as well as Central and South America, and then of course the Africa. This is where we have that. Don't really have to worry about that, but generally we have the Old World monkeys and New World monkeys. South America and Central America, they're quite different. from each other. Don't have to worry much about those hominids. We talk about those a little bit, the characteristics, brain, language capabilities, etc. We discuss all of that. Somewhere how possibly our ancestors were evolving, and remember, Paranthropuses were evolving parallel to us, but they went all muscles. We have all brains, and then Homo erectus again. See, was very, very successful species, relatively small hominid, but very successful species. But as soon as Neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens, they cease to exist. Those are the guys. Habilis was quite successful too. Those guys are one of the first hominids which ventured out of Africa to begin with. So yeah, and again, that particular picture, it's a little bit misleading. Remember, it's not the straight line, so to speak. There was quite a few different ancestors and so on. Misconception, thinking of them chimpanzees. Please do not tell me that we evolved from chimpanzees. We didn't. Chimpanzees did not evolve from humans as well. It's pretty much the same thing saying we evolved from chimpanzees. It's like humans into a chimpanzees. No, it didn't happen. We had a common ancestor at some point of time, but common ancestor does not mean it was a chimpanzee ancestor. It split, and then we had the whole branch which lead to the modern chimpanzees, and all branches of evolution which moved to the Homo sapiens. Like I said, ladder rather than the this one is not really, slightly misleading. It's not exactly the straight line ladder from this to that to that. So first humans, we talk about that, and here we have several interesting concepts saying, well, basically some of the Homo erectus, remember, coming out in breeding, but some of this is two separate ideas. Africans were evolving on the African continent, European, Asian, and Australasian, and basically because of the inbreeding, we consider to be a single species. Some of the people say, which is probably not exactly the truth. Most likely we evolved as a species in Africa, and we ventured out of Africa, while taking over the world essentially. So yeah, this is the recovered picture, well, recovered bones of infamous Lucy. We talked about that before, right? So let's see, yeah. Australopiths, we talk about those guys, bipedalism, use of the tool, also talk about all of those particular ones again. Chimps or gorillas or anything that are not our direct ancestors. So, and we discuss all that with Neanderthalensis. Yeah, well, again, if you'll take that particular guy, give him or girl, probably a guy, to give him a nice bath as well as the good stylist, you will not be able to tell the difference much. So yeah, and Homo sapiens, somewhere between 200 to 160,000 ago, and we eventually took over the entire world. Yeah, symbolic thoughts, art, etc. And we are done for today. And we're done with the lecture on the, well, on that particular unit, right? So we are completely done with the